We understand there are these animal cruelty laws, there are laws about animal welfare. They don't do nothing, but they do so little.
Welcome to the Hen Report. This is Mariann Sullivan. Jasmin had some family affairs to take care of today, and everything is fine. But today I am delighted to be joined once again by Wingman, Michael Dorf, who is, of course, a professor of constitutional law at Cornell, author of like a gazillion things, which I'm not going to try to remember, and one of our very, very favorite animal advocates. And it's also having a very, very busy week because the Supreme Court, like that's kind of what he does. But he's joining us anyway. So thank you so much, Michael.
Thank you so much for having me. I have big wings to fill in Jasmin's absence, but I'll do my best.
I'm not going to say I'm sure you can because no matter what I say there,
Can't win.
It's going to be bad. Yeah. All right, just a quick reminder about the Our Hen House podcast. Rising Anxieties Tuesdays, Hen Report This on Thursdays, the long-form interview on Fridays, bonus for Flock members comes out on Monday. We're podcasts, we're on YouTube. Hit like, subscribe, all that. All right. Michael, what's happening in Ithaca? I haven't seen you in so long.
I know, it's terrible. Ever since you retired from teaching your animal law class, I don't get to see you in Ithaca, and I don't get to Rochester as often as I ought to.
You don't get to Rochester ever.
Occasionally.
So there you go.
I could get. I know the directions. So let's see. I'm going to a nice potluck tonight, vegan potluck at the home of a couple of vegans, including one well-known animal rights advocate, Eric Lindstrom. And so they're having a nice 4th of July vegan potluck on the 1st of July. So that'll be nice. It's actually an interesting...
Is it going to be air conditioned? It's very, very hot here.
Yeah, it'll probably be moved indoors, is my guess. Yeah, it's very hot here as well. But we don't know why. Can't.
No, I think I mentioned before. I got this from somebody else. We're entering the find out part of the fuck around and find out climate change.
Yeah, so unfortunately, that part is going to last a while, I think.
Yes. Yes.
So anyway, so it's very nice. I had a couple of interesting vegan experiences over the last few days. So over the weekend, I went to a birthday party for a colleague of mine, who's I'd say we're friends, but mostly professional friends. And so he had a lot of his other colleagues there. It was a really lovely party, and I was really touched by how many vegan items they had, and they were labeled vegan, including they had a make your own tortilla kind of thing, burrito kind of thing, and they had vegan cheese and vegan sour cream in addition to beans and things. So it was great. And then the birthday cake wasn't vegan, but they'd gotten some vegan cookies, and so it was great. And I think I was literally the only vegan at this party of about 50 people. So I thought that was really great. And this isn't a criticism, but it's just kind of an observation. So as I was leaving, thanking and, wishing happy birthday and all, one of the hosts was like, "Oh, take these cookies," which were they were the leftover vegan cookies, right? Because of course the implication was, what else are we going to do with them? Can't possibly eat them. And they were delicious cookies, so I took them. But, it was, kind of a reminder. And I had a similar experience last night.
Classic.
I went with a friend from out of town and a couple of other friends, and my daughter Amelia, who's home for a little while during the summer. We went to Moosewood, which, as many listeners probably know, is a very well-known vegetarian restaurant in Ithaca. It's been
legendary.
It's been around since the 70s. And for a long time, it seems sort of stuck in the 70s. They were very famous for their cookbook, which is a really good...
Right. I had it, I think, in the 70s.
Yeah, it was a very good 1970s era cookbook, and it didn't change. And the menu didn't change very much, but it was sold to some other people who were running it kind of almost like a museum restaurant for years. And then a few years ago, it was bought by, I think, the children of the original owners. And they've really done a great job in, reviving it and modernizing the menu. But it's still a vegetarian restaurant.
Didn't they started serving fish at some
point? They did.
Point.
They don't anymore. There was a period when they had fish, but they don't at this point.
Good.
But I would say about half of the items on the menu are natively vegan, and most of them have a little VO next to them, meaning vegan option. So of course I ordered, something vegan for my breakfast. And then, for the table, a of the six of us, two were vegans, Amelia and myself. So for the table, we ordered like one appetizer that was naturally vegan, and the other folks ordered, two of the things that were vegetarian and asked for the cheese on the side. Okay, fine. I didn't have to eat the cheese. You could have gotten it just vegan, but then nobody ate the cheese. And so, I thought like, what is that? What's going on there?
What's that all about?
And so I do think that there is a kind of residual marketing problem, right? It's not that they were like, if they didn't put the cheese on, that they knew what they were eating was vegan, but still they didn't, like, they were hesitant to order the vegan option on itself. So that's just a couple of observations about.
I think your interpretation is generous, but you know these people better than I do. It seems I don't know, like.
Well, I think that they were.
Like, there's a resistance, like, damn it, we're not going to order, even though we don't really even want the cheese, we're not going to order the vegan thing.
But, they were.
We won't give in to Michael Dorf.
But nobody objected to going to Moosewood in the
fanaticism.
first place, right? So,
True.
So anyway, so that's where we are.
Well, it's good. Well, I know you're insanely busy, but you did agree to join us. I think you have a few things to say that you wanted to talk about that have to do with SCOTUS, surprisingly enough. But also, I was pleased to see that you wanted to talk about a couple of things that we discussed in the interview last week, which was with Wayne Hsiung, Stephen Seitz, and Chris Carraway. And Stephen and Chris are both lawyers at University of Denver Animal Activist Clinic. And Wayne, of course, is Wayne. And something I discussed on Rising Anxieties, a soup by legal impact for chickens. And I could not, when you told me this, I could not figure out what these had in common or why you wanted to talk about them. So play through.
All right. Well, it's not just to demonstrate what a fan I am of the Our Hen House universe of podcasts. So for example,
it was a little suck-uppy. I'm not going to deny it. Oh my God. Oh my God.
Okay. So here's what I saw as the connection. So during the episode of the Animal Law podcast, one of the points that came up was how the appeals court in California made contradictory demands of Wayne and his appeal, right? So with respect to the necessity defense. So on the one hand, I'm just repeating what was said on your episode.
Right.
You need to show that you've exhausted all other means before you can break the law to avert a greater evil. But on the other hand, you have to show that it's an emergency. And if you go through all the steps to show you're exhausting other means, well, takes time, takes planning, and that shows it's not an emergency. So it's a catch-22. And I was struck by the similarity with the discussion in the story you read about the case by Legal Impact for Chickens against Foster Farms, right, of the requirement that the activists document what's going on at the farm for a cruelty case if they want to turn it over to the authorities. And the documentation involves extensive observation. And then there was this possibility that through the observation, they might themselves have some sort of complicity because they're standing by and doing nothing. Now, I don't actually think that that's legally true. I don't think that the observation makes one complicit in the evil. That's just not the way our law generally works. But the setup was there as a possibility. And I think the person who wrote the story that you were describing said that doesn't seem fair. And of course, it doesn't seem fair. But it does remind me of, both of these situations remind me of what I have dealt with in wearing my other hat as a lawyer, sometimes working on or teaching about habeas corpus cases. Now, I don't want to get into all this because it's incredibly complicated, as you know, and so it's complicated for lawyers. It's insane for non-lawyers. The main point I want to make is that there are a series of doctrines that the Supreme Court has announced. Some of them they just made up. Others they sort of made up interpreting various statutes that Congress has passed, whereby in order to qualify for habeas corpus, which means release from prison or a new trial or something like that, on the grounds that there was some constitutional violation in the original proceeding. In order to qualify, you need to pass through this hoop. But the legal test that enables you to pass through this hoop means you can't pass through this other hoop, which you also have to pass through to get relief, right? So it
does sound similar.
yeah, so it's literally impossible. And the question is, why would the law ever create such circumstances? And I think there are two possibilities. One is, well, sometimes these tests develop independently and nobody's really thinking about how they operate as a system. And that's a kind of, innocent explanation. But other times when you see this, I think what you're noticing is that there's a kind of lie being told, right? The lie that in the habeas case, don't worry, habeas is this safeguard, so people can, if there's a real injustice, people can get out of prison. It really isn't true, but it's there to sort of assuage people. I think that's maybe true with respect to the necessity defense. I think it's certainly true with respect to laws regulating the treatment of animals much more broadly, right? That is, we understand there are these animal cruelty laws, there are laws about animal welfare. They don't do nothing, but they do so little. And the effect is to send a message that is very much inconsistent with what is actually going on. So that's sort of where I ended up and how I saw the through line.
No, I like that prism to see, and it is a prism because it distorts everything. Nice one, Mariann. A way of looking at it that it makes it impossible to clearly qualify for any of these things. If a judge wants to, if it's a very sympathetic case, the judge could always overlook one of the qualifications that are contradictory or whatever. But there's always a way out.
Yeah.
There's no clear legal right here. It's just maybe an opportunity. Yeah, that's very good.
Well,
I like it.
Well, it came out of your last two podcasts. So.
You go first. No, you go first.
Yeah.
All right. You also, this is the one that surprised me, since you've been thinking of nothing but SCOTUS, which I really don't understand how you are living through it. I really don't, because there have been a few bright spots. I seriously was thinking this morning, they put those cases in there, the bright spots, like the birthright citizenship, knowing that they weren't going to reverse it, though some of them wanted to, so that it wouldn't look like they were just screwing the Constitution in every way possible. But anyway, that's not what you want to talk about.
No, but that is a sort of continuation of this theme, right? Of, it looks like you're doing something, but it's actually not there. And in fact, I'm writing up all sorts of commentary on the past term, one of which I'm going to write for SCOTUS blog for Friday probably, which is one of the things that's happened in this last term and during basically since Trump has been in power is that the Overton window is shifted so far to the right, what is sort of debatable, that when they reject something that he does that's completely outlandish, it makes them seem reasonable, except that nobody even thought that this was on the table before. And that's a little bit like what we just been discussing, but that's not what I wanted to talk about. What I want to talk about,
they're moving the Overton window totally in the wrong direction.
So
can I just clarify one thing? We do have some listeners from other countries, and I just want to say SCOTUS is what we call the Supreme Court of the United States, in case that wasn't clear.
Right. Yes. And Chili is my dog in the background there. Well, he's one of my dogs. You can see him. Hi, Chili. So I wouldn't name a dog SCOTUS. That would be cruel.
No, that would be awful.
Yeah. So the thought I had, and it's really a elaborate way to get to segue into a discussion of something else, but the thought I had was out of the birthright citizenship case mostly, and that is, everybody agrees that Section 1 of the 14th Amendment's citizenship clause was adopted for the primary purpose of reversing the Dred Scott decision, which said that Black Americans could not be citizens, whether or not they were enslaved. And so the Civil War ends, the 13th Amendment ends slavery, And so to ensure that there's citizenship in the 14th Amendment, there's this first sentence, all persons born and naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the states wherein they reside. And the language, though, that I've just described, right, doesn't say anything about former slaves. It's just about people being entitled to citizenship if they're born here. And part of the back and forth between the majority and the dissent in the case is about the extent to which the provision takes on a life of its own because of its broad language. So the inspiration for it, the reason why they put this language in the Constitution was to ensure citizenship for people who were formerly enslaved, but the language goes more broadly. And so that sort of put me in mind of a project I've been working on this summer as well, which I know you wanted to talk about a little bit as well. And that is a paper I'm writing for a symposium on the recent book by John Adenatire and Raphael Fossil on animals and the Constitution. And by the Constitution, I think you've had discussions of this, right? But just a reminder, by the Constitution, John and Raphael, who are based in the UK, don't mean any particular constitution. They mean, constitutional rights more broadly, because a big piece of their argument, right? They want to move towards sentience-based constitutionalism. But a big piece of their argument is that existing constitutional provisions, which no doubt were inspired by things having nothing to do with the treatment of non-human animals, might nonetheless be leveraged and used to find rights for non-human animals. It's in some sense, it's a very, very common move in the law, but it's also potentially, quite radical. So that was the connection there. And so I'm happy to talk about that piece of it, or more broadly a little bit about John and Raphael's book, which I know you've featured in various ways, but because I had to write this.
I had them on to talk about it.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I remember the episode. And I had them in my seminar last year at the law school. But I did had to write this essay, and so I had to sort of grapple with that, and might want to talk a little bit about that.
I think it's a hugely important concept that there might have been a deliberate choice to use broad language. I mean, we shouldn't assume that they were just. I'm talking about the 14th Amendment.
I think there was.
They didn't think. I mean, they would. The only people who this will ever apply to would be former enslaved people. I mean,
no, and in fact,
they knew that it would be broader than that.
That's right. And in the opinions, they talk about the way in which, during the debates, during the Reconstruction Congress, people are talking about what will be the impact on Chinese immigration, which was, of course, an issue that would grow more salient in the next couple of decades. They talked about its impact on Native Americans and others. So they're aware of it, even though the original impetus is to deal with people who have recently been freed from slavery.
One thing it does make me think of, and I do want to get to John and Raphael's, a little bit about John and Raphael's book, though I suggest people listen to the interview to get more deeply into it. But like cruelty laws are written so incredibly generally, like unnecessary suffering. Nobody knows what it means because it's written so broadly. And perhaps we should start thinking of that a little bit more, about how, and it's interpreted bizarrely narrowly. Like it was necessary to, use horses for transport 150 years ago, so that must still apply. It's necessary to make money, so that must still apply. When it's interpreted at all, it's interpreted basically to eliminate the meaning of the word necessary. Of course, New York, I should mention, uses the word unjustifiable, but it basically means the same thing. And I think that's another thing that needs a second look, about how it should be more broadly I mean, this is my whole life. It's not just something I just thought of. It should only be more broadly interpreted, but interpreted relevant to the current day. Things that were necessary then are not necessary anymore. We could be entering into a, a new age of our relationship with animals. We don't have to say what they did in the past was wrong. We can say it or not say it. We don't have to. It's different. And if we look at that word necessary and interpret it in a modern light, nothing that we do to them is necessary anymore.
Yeah,
the world is very
so a
different.
few years ago, I co-taught a seminar called Human Rights and Animal Rights, and the idea was to look at how arguments you make about one flow into the other and vice versa. And one of the things I would note about this idea is what you've just described is pretty much commonplace within the law generally. So even people who consider themselves, conservatives or originalists will acknowledge that the application of a word can change even as its meaning is fixed. So there's a great decision by Justice Scalia from many years ago in which he's interpreting what it means to be arraigned in a reasonable amount of time, and how long the police can hold somebody after they arrest them before they bring them before a judge. And what he says is, look, I don't remember what the particular constitutional text was, something like unreasonable, right? So what was reasonable in a time when people moved about on horseback and they communicated, over long distances by sending letters is different from what's reasonable today with much speedier transportation and communication. And so a shorter period is all you get. And everyone thought that made perfect sense. What's notable to me is that so often in cases involving animals, that kind of common sense just goes out the window because of motivated reasoning, right? That is, the judges are afraid that, well, if I take this literally, it means, that's the end of animal agriculture and can't have that, right?
Proves
Right.
too much.
Yeah.
You interpret necessary correctly, like by its dictionary meaning, not like some alternative meaning, but just by its dictionary meaning, and everything would change. So in your article, which I had a chance to read about the book, there was a quote I pulled out. I told you at the time that I particularly loved, because you're talking about the conversation that they start in proposing this theme of sentient constitutionalism. I think it is that we should extend some sort of constitutional recognition or rights to all sentient beings. And you talk about a number of reasons why this is unwieldy. Is that a fair word? Difficult, maybe not the right approach.
Yeah. So first of all, I should say I really love the book. I think it's deeply.
It's an important book,
it's very, very thorough, and it engages with real world cases across multiple legal systems in various parts of the world, and also deeply with the scholarly literature across various fields. So it's quite an accomplishment. And of course, I share the ultimate goal of John and Raphael, which is to inhabit a world in which there is respect shown for the interests of all sentient beings. The questions that I raise are, I would say, either strategic or tactical, right? Well, that's Kona, who's now entered the room, and he's sleeping. So the question I raise is whether you need constitutionalism in order to achieve what we want for animals. And I have two sorts of concerns. So one is just kind of practical about democracy, right? That is, this is an argument about constitutional democracy. And, we've all encountered a kind of skeptic when you say you're for animal rights. They say, oh, well, should, squirrels have the right to vote? And the answer with that, of course, is no. What John and Raphael say in response to that, with which I agree, is, but that doesn't mean their interests oughtn't to be considered. And they talk about ways of, they have the idea of having spokespeople for animal interests. So you could set aside in the legislature some number of seats for people who would be sort of a guardian of the interests of various animals, and they would speak for those animals. And so my criticism of that is not that I think it's a bad idea, but that I think that that's not really what we would call constitutional democracy, right? That is to say, in a world in which we take all sentient beings' interests into account, there are many, many more non-human animals than there are humans. And if we are really going to, and can you really call something a democracy where the, vast majority of citizens, which is what they want to call the animals in this world, don't have a direct voice in the government? Now, I think democracy can and does function even when many people either don't vote or are incapable of exercising the franchise because they're very young children or because they have some severe intellectual disability. But nonetheless, these are people that John and Raphael refer to as non-paradigmatic humans. Nonetheless, I think the system functions based on the assumption that the sort of average person is a paradigmatic human. And it's a little odd when the sort of average is, someone who doesn't have literally a voice in the democracy. So that's a kind of theoretical objection. I have a more practical objection, though, which is about the distinction. Well, so I should say. So I think that we ought to think of animals as at least moral patients. That is, beings who deserve our respect and whom we care about, but not necessarily as fully moral agents, beings with responsibilities and fully capable of participating in the project of mutual self-governance. But again, that's mostly theoretical. I have a further practical worry, which is that once you acknowledge a kind of constitutional obligation, it would seem that the resources of modern governments are going to be overly burdened, right? That is, many countries, not the US, unfortunately, but many countries have economic, social, and cultural rights. Things like right to housing, right to education, right to health care. Not all animals would benefit from all of these, but I think all of them would benefit from some of those, like health care, for example. So in a world in which we are treating non-human animals as part of the political community, I think it would be unacceptable to say, everybody at the age of 65 or older gets Medicare, but only humans, and no veterinary care for older animals or the sick or whatever it is. And that becomes prohibitively expensive. And I think that we kind of recognize that as vegans, right? We think that, the baseline obligation is non-harm.
Right.
We ought to do things. It would be good to do things to help, but we don't spend every last dime we have helping. This is, you see some of this discussed in the altruism literature, but generally, we think it's permissible to draw a distinction between everybody to whom we owe an obligation of non-harm and those to whom we think we owe an obligation or we want to provide benefits for. And I think that including non-human animals within a sort of constitutional scheme makes that too demanding, and therefore you're going to end up with a kind of very, either you don't get it or you have a very constrained libertarian government that does almost nothing for anybody.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with all of that. And also that I don't know how we make this happen. I mean, they do talk about incremental change, but it's hard to imagine getting from here to there.
Right. Well, so one of the points I make is that in a world in which what they want for the Constitution is politically possible, you probably don't need it. That is to say, you would have people who care enough about animals not to harm them and to do things that are in their interests, even if not giving them, exactly the same right to health insurance as every human.
So speaking of moral patience, which is such an annoying word, like just makes me think of them sitting in the hospital, but that's not how we're using it.
I didn't come up with it also.
If we enforce, I know, it's a term. If we enforce cruelty laws literally, and in this day and age, would that kind of achieve that? Or is the law already on the books that would achieve this? It's just not interpreted. And why is it not interpreted?
Well, if this is stopping animal agriculture, I think the answer is yes. Stopping a lot of use of animals in other ways, yes. If it's full equality in the sense of equal right to having the government not just abstain from doing harm, but to provide benefits, then I think the answer is no.
No, I mean, like, just that's how I was interpreting moral patience. That creatures who we respect and who have dignity, but we don't have to affirmatively aid them.
Yeah. So I think this is terminological, but I think the distinction between moral patience and moral agents is more about what they can do and less about the distinction between
that sounds right. Yeah,
positive and negative rights in that terms. But yes, with respect to the question, I think you're really asking, right, which is, what could we achieve if we took the existing laws and applied them according to the actual meaning of the words rather than in ways that just try to preserve the status quo. Yeah, sure. I mean, by any definition of cruelty, you just think about what is done to animals and you ask if that were done to a human, would we regard that as cruelty? And the answer is almost always obviously yes.
Yeah, and just, is that in any legitimate sense of the word necessary? Right. Are you familiar with the Oregon ballot initiative?
Remind me. This is
very interesting.
Oh, this is the one that would radically change, like basically outlaw animal agriculture, but that's not what they're saying.
It has an interesting cruelty law in that it doesn't have an exception for anything necessary or justifiable. It has spelled out exceptions for like agriculture and I don't know, hunting and fishing and all sorts of things. But it does not have this, and it's a fairly modern law and seen as one of the best laws because it does spell things out. Because the problem with the ones that don't spell things out is that they get interpreted to mean absolutely nothing. And so, the Oregon IP 28, it's called. It's been on the ballot it hasn't been on the ballot. There have been signature gathering efforts for several years. This year, it looks like they're going to make it onto the ballot. And I'll tell you, there are a lot of people out there in the industry who are like, what the hell? Interesting that they're that upset because it's not like anybody thinks it's going to pass. Mm-hmm. So maybe they do.
Yeah, you never know, right?
Certainly, I mean, gives an opportunity to start a conversation.
Right. Oh, the other thing, right? As part of the research for this paper I wrote on John Raphael's book, I looked into some of the research on public opinions, and you get these astounding results. Like, should animals have the same rights as humans? And like a third of the respondents say yes. And then you say, but
I think it was higher than
it's incredible.
Totally.
Right? And these are people who are, they're eating meat and they're wearing leather. There's like what? And so it's possible. You could imagine voters in Oregon like reading this and thinking like, yeah, that seems right, even though it's completely contradictory to the way they're living. And then there would be, of course, the risk that it gets interpreted away.
What's also interesting is that people looking at it, they wouldn't have to really confront this contradiction because it's not a sales ban. I mean, you can bring all the steak from Idaho into to Oregon and sell it. So that really closes down people's minds when they think, oh, I would have to go vegan. No, you don't have to go vegan. You just have to say, in Oregon, we don't do this to animals. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, it is a little weird to me that someone would I get that a lot of people are just not thinking about it, but I feel this way about some of the bans on local activities, right? I understand why someone who doesn't, if you don't wear, I'm thinking about some of the slaughterhouse cases. Like if you're not eating horse meat, it's perfectly sensible that you also don't want there to be a slaughterhouse for horses in your neighborhood. But if you are eating or wearing or whatever it is, and yet you nonetheless vote for the thing to ban it from your area, not because you think it has it's not a so-called LULU, locally undesirable land use, or it doesn't have polluting effect, but because you have a moral objection. I don't quite understand the mindset that says I have a moral objection to this being nearby, but not to using the products of the exact same kind of facility if it's being shipped in. But apparently there are people who think that way.
I think there are a lot of people who think that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't explain it either, but I think that we're all familiar with the fact that people kind of think that way. They just want to be completely deceived
Right.
about what's actually happening to animals.
Yeah. So maybe this
So
doubles back to where we started, right? Where you've got these, when you've got the law that looks like it provides a path, but it actually cuts off all the pathways because they're contradictory, and that's to tell people a lie. Well, it might be it's a lie that people want to hear.
yeah, totally. Easy way out. All right. Well, since we've gone back to the beginning, I guess I should let you go. I know that you have really a
Well,
lot
tell
to
me what's going
do.
on with you, Mariann. We talked all about me.
Me?
Yeah.
Nothing's ever going on with me. I just sit here. The woman next door, who's very elderly, asked me the other day, "What is it that you do at your dining room table?" I guess she looks into my windows and sees me sitting here. So that's what I do. I talk to all of you.
Right. Yeah. Well, I will say that there was one piece of Central and Western New York news that I found very sad recently, which is that Strong Hearts is closing.
Oh, it's a
Yeah.
tragedy. Tragedy.
Which I realized it opened when I moved to Ithaca. It opened in 2008, which is when I came here. So I hadn't realized at the time that it was brand new. But, for me, the Buffalo location only existed for a few years, but the Syracuse location,
Yeah, I've never been to the Buffalo
it's nice.
location. This obviously, for you out there, we're talking about a
Yeah,
restaurant, which actually two restaurants, very beloved among Western New York vegan scene, unbelievably good food. Not health
no.
food by any means, but really, really well done and totally, completely animal
Yes,
rights.
yes. No, I talked to one of the owners on several occasions, and yeah, Joel was very committed, and I know that they really, if they could keep it going, they would. So it's an unfortunate development for us.
Yeah, on that sad note.
Yeah. Well, I would give some happy news or something, but if I could.
Happy news. Let's see. Well, you've been thinking about SCOTUS, so
Could be
that's really not
worse.
a good avenue to go down. It could be
Right.
worse. It could.
Yes. Right.
Except, like I said, I think they put the cases that they didn't screw up. I think they put them in there so it would look more even.
Yeah. Maybe.
Oh, what a world! What a world!
All right. Well, hope we haven't depressed people too much.
No, I think that you were not depressing until you got to the very end, so that's good. I do have a few announcements for people. If you want to,
I'll. s- I'll. s-
do you need to
No,
jump
I'll stay
off
here for the
or?
announcements.
All right. One is I think that probably most of you have been following the Save Our Bacon Act, which is the act in Congress that would eliminate states' ability to do things like Prop 12 in California, which is it puts in minor but important reforms for farmed animals. Have enormous amounts of work has gone into making these things happen, and so I have said before that it looks pretty good because it passed in the House Farm Bill. It's been taken out of the Senate Farm Bill, but that is not the end. It can always be put back either by the Senate or in conference committee. So the effort continues because this would be seriously a pretty big disaster. So there's a lobbying effort run by the Humane League on Wednesday, July 8th. It's online. And they're partnering with a bunch of other groups that are Animal Policy Alliance members, some of which you've heard on the podcast. And they're going to do a training. And this is really good. It's really good for this. And also just in general, I like that they're doing this. They're really helping people learn how to do this. So they will arrange it. You do the training and they try, they have people, professional lobbyists who will explain like how to handle it. Then they set up a meeting with your senator and they join you on the meeting with your senator. So there'll be one constituent and one pro. And I did notice too that there was a rally planned in New York City in front of Senator Schumer's office to get him to oppose the Save Our Bacon Act. And as soon as he heard about it, he opposed the Save Our Bacon Act. I mean, we have to get louder. But he just hadn't heard about it. And, as soon as he knew people were protesting, he was like, oh, yeah, I'm against that. So I think this is a great idea. Their goal is to train and prepare 150 plus grassroots lobbyists for 20 meetings with senators, at least 20 meetings with senators. And they've had 40 lobbyists meet with 12 senators. I think this is great. It's not just for this bill, it's building this network of grassroots lobbyists. And I love that people don't have to do it on themselves because, I'm shy and I'm sure other people are too. All right, another announcement is from Jordi Casamajana, who was on the podcast pretty recently, just a couple months ago. He's an independent researcher, an author, and passionate vegan. And he is conducting what he is calling the Huge Vegan Survey. And he wants to get as many vegans as he can to respond. And he's looking at issues like what attracted people to veganism, what makes people stay vegan for longer, all questions about how they transitioned, and just trying to use this information to design better strategies. And he's got 7,000 responses so far, but he wants a lot more. Jordi is a very committed person. he's very persuasive. So it's all online, free, and completely anonymous. And we will put that link in the show notes. And that's what I have for announcements. As for us, this will come out on Thursday. So I guess it's Thursday if you're listening to this or later. And our next interview is going to be really great with the authors of this book, Renard, the House Wolf, but it's about so much more than that. Tom Grotwall and Saul Anzarena, and they are amazing, amazing activists from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan who just kind of got mad at this copper mine and like, you just can't believe what they've accomplished. And all right, so that'll be the interview. Bonus for Flock members comes out on Monday. Don't forget, we're a podcast. We're on YouTube. Subscribe, hit like wherever you listen. And I'll see you next time with Jasmin. Thank you, Michael.
My pleasure. Thank you.